The knock lasted 4 seconds. 4 seconds for the woman who had spent 7 years calling me a burden to stand on my porch and ring my doorbell like she had every right to be there. I knew it was Rose before I even opened the door. I knew it by the rhythm of it. 3 quick raps, a pause, one more. Confident. Demanding. The knock of a woman who had spent her whole life expecting the world to hold the door for her. I was wrong about one thing, though. When I pulled the door open, the woman on my porch wasn't the Rose Callahan I remembered. The Rose I remembered never left the house without her hair done and a story to tell about how well she was doing. The woman standing in my porch light was wearing a coat 2 sizes too big, the collar turned up against the cold, her face bare, her eyes red and swollen in a way that no amount of mascara could hide anymore. She looked like someone who had been crying in her car before she worked up the nerve to knock. "Ethan," she said. Just my name. Like she was testing how it felt in her mouth. "Rose." I didn't move. I didn't invite her in. 7 years of Sundays, 7 years of that word she loved to use, sat in the space between us like furniture. "I need to talk to you. It's important. It's about the house." The house. 30 seconds in, and she was already talking about the house. I leaned against the doorframe and let her stand there in the wind, and I thought about how long I had waited for this moment without ever once wanting it. 7 years. 7 years of burden this and dead weight that. 7 years of watching her roll her eyes every time I walked into her parents' kitchen. 7 years of her husband Derek smirking at me across the dinner table like I was a stray dog that had wandered in off the street. And now she needed me. The woman who had never needed anyone in her life had run out of everyone else, and she had come to the one person she had spent 7 years trying to crush. The funny part? I'd been expecting her for 3 months. I knew exactly what she was going to ask for before she opened her mouth. I knew the number. I knew the timeline. I knew the desperation she was about to perform for me like it was the first honest thing she'd ever done. And I knew what she didn't know, that the house she was about to beg me to save was already saved. It had been saved for 4 months, by me, in silence, for reasons that had nothing to do with her. "Come in," I said finally. "We should talk." She stepped past me into the hallway, and the wind caught the door and slammed it shut behind her, and I thought, "You have no idea who you're standing in front of, Rose. You never took the time to find out." By the time she left my kitchen that night, she knew everything. She knew about the company, the warehouses, the contracts, the balance in my accounts. She knew about the note I held on her house. She knew the exact words she had said to me over 7 years of holidays, because I said them all back to her, one by one, with dates. And she knew the truth I had known since the day she first called me a burden. I was never the burden. I was the one who had been quietly carrying everything, including her, while she sat in her big house and looked down on a man she had never once bothered to understand. But to understand the knock, you need to understand the 7 years that came before it. You need to understand the man I was when this started, and the man I became while she wasn't looking. So let me take you back to the beginning. Let me take you back to the night it all fell apart, because that's the night Rose decided I was the burden, and that's the night everything I have now quietly began. My name is Ethan Brooks. I'm 39 years old. I live in a 3-bedroom house on the edge of Hilltop, a neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio that most people in my wife's family had never set foot in before my wedding day. I run a company that most of my in-laws have never once asked me about, in the years I've known them. And 10 years ago, I married the best woman I've ever met, a nurse named Lauren, who believed in me when believing in me looked like the dumbest decision a person could make. This is the story of the 7 years Rose Callahan called me a burden, and the Tuesday night she showed up at my door to find out that the burden had been carrying her the whole time. I met Lauren Whitfield in the summer of 2014, at a charity run through Goodale Park. She was 26, a nurse at Riverside Methodist, and she was handing out water cups at mile 3 with this no-nonsense focus that I found immediately attractive. I was a sales rep for a construction supply company, I was losing my hair early, and I was wearing a shirt that said a company name on it, but she asked me what I did for a living like she actually cared about the answer. That was the thing about Lauren. She listened to people. She didn't just wait for her turn to talk. She asked real questions and remembered real answers, and that was so rare in my experience that I proposed to her 11 months later. Her family was a different universe. The Whitfields were old Columbus money, not the kind that comes with a brass plaque on a building, but the kind that comes with a colonial in Bexley, a lake house in Michigan, and the unspoken assumption that their daughters would marry men who could walk into a country club without checking the dress code. Her father, Jim, had owned a commercial real estate firm before he sold it in the 90s and retired into a life of golf and quiet disapproval. Her mother, Nancy, was a former debutante who ran the family calendar like a minor government agency. And then there was Rose, Lauren's older sister by 4 years. Rose was the family's official success story. She had married Derek Callahan, a financial advisor who had just opened his own firm downtown, and the two of them lived in a new construction house in New Albany with a kitchen island the size of my first apartment. Rose managed a charity foundation, drove a leased Mercedes, and spoke about her life the way other people speak about weather forecasts, like everyone in the room was waiting to hear it. She was beautiful, she knew it, and she had gotten very good at smiling in a way that told you exactly where you ranked. I met Rose for the first time at the Whitfield house, about 2 weeks after Lauren introduced me to Jim and Nancy. Rose had come over for Sunday dinner, swept in with a bottle of wine and a story about a gala she just chaired, and she shook my hand like she was testing whether I was worth the effort. "Ethan," she said, drawing the name out. "Lauren's told us you're in construction supplies." "Industrial supply," I said. "We distribute materials to commercial contractors." "So you're the middleman." She smiled at her own joke. "Derek's always saying the middleman is where the money is. You must be doing very well." It was the first time she said it that way, light, laughing, impossible to call out without looking thin-skinned. It would not be the last. I didn't know it yet, but I had just been measured, weighed, and filed somewhere under acceptable for now. Derek arrived late, all handshakes and backslaps, and spent the first 10 minutes telling Jim about a client he'd just landed, some manufacturing company that had handed him a 7-figure portfolio. "It's all about relationships," he said, with a grin that included everyone at the table and meant none of them. He asked me what I did, I told him, and he nodded like he was doing me a favor by pretending to care. That was the dynamic from the start. Rose and Derek were the winning team. Lauren was the sweet one, the nurse, the one who did the actual work in the family while Rose got the credit for chairing the fundraiser. And I was the new guy from the wrong side of the city, with the company shirt and the modest salary, who had somehow convinced Lauren Whitfield to say yes. Our wedding was in the spring of 2015, at a small venue on the river, and even on my wedding day Rose managed to make her opinion known. She made a toast, of course she made a toast, and she raised her glass to the two of them, proving that love really is blind to background. Lauren laughed it off. My mother, who had driven 5 hours from Akron and was sitting in the front row in her best dress, didn't laugh at all. But here's the thing about the early years with the Whitfields, Rose was mostly harmless. She was condescending, sure. She talked over me at dinner, she corrected my stories, she made sure everyone knew how much Derek's new car cost and where they were vacationing this winter. But she wasn't cruel. Not yet. She didn't have a reason to be. That changed 8 years ago, when I gave her the only thing she ever needed to justify looking down on me. I lost everything. 8 years ago, I was 29 years old and I had everything I thought I wanted. I had left my sales job 2 years earlier to become a partner in a construction supply company, Tierney Brooks, serving the Central Ohio market. My partner, a guy named Marcus Tierney, was the charming one. I was the one who showed up early, checked the inventory, and kept the books honest. For 2 years it worked. We grew from a single warehouse on the west side to a main facility with a dozen employees, and I poured every dollar I made back into the company. Lauren and I bought a small fixer-upper in Hilltop and I spent my weekends with a hammer in my hand, turning it into a home I was proud of. We were building something. That's what I told myself every night when I got home with drywall dust in my hair. I was wrong about the whole thing, but not for the reason you'd think. The company didn't fail because of the market. The market was fine. It failed because Marcus Tierney had been slowly, methodically stealing from it for 18 months. Fake vendors, inflated invoices, a shell account he'd set up under his cousin's name. By the time I noticed the discrepancy and hired a forensic accountant, the number was already at $1.9 million. $1.9 million. He hadn't been taking a little off the top. He'd been hollowing the company out from the inside. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He laughed. He told me I was naive, that everyone in business schemes a little, that I'd get over it. Then he filed for personal bankruptcy, skipped town, and left me holding the bag, including the lines of credit I had personally guaranteed because I believed in the company enough to put my own name on the paper. $380,000 of debt, a business I had built with my own hands reduced to an empty warehouse, and a partner who was sipping margaritas in Florida while I did the math on how long it would take me to die financially. The collapse came fast. Creditors filed within weeks. The bank seized the warehouse. We lost the house we'd been fixing up, the bank took it before I could even get a sign in the yard. My mother let us sleep in her spare room in Akron for 4 months while I took any job I could find. I drove a delivery van. I did inventory at night. I gutted kitchens on weekends for a contractor who paid me under the table because I was too ashamed to tell him I had once owned a company he'd have struggled to afford. And Lauren. God, Lauren. She never once made me feel like a failure. She worked double shifts at the hospital while I sat at my mother's kitchen table filling out applications, and when I told her she should leave me, that she'd signed up for a man who could provide and instead got a man who couldn't even keep a roof over her head, she put her hand on the back of my neck, looked me in the eye, and said, "Ethan Brooks. I did not marry your bank account. I married you. And I am not going anywhere." It was the best and worst moment of my life. Best because I knew in that instant that I had married the right woman. Worst because I knew, with total certainty, that the rest of her family did not feel the same way. The first time Rose called me a burden was Thanksgiving, 8 years ago. I will never forget it, because I had spent the whole meal trying to be invisible, and she made sure I wasn't. We were at Jim and Nancy's Colonial, the whole family around the table, and I was doing my best imitation of a man who wasn't actively drowning. I had $12,000 left to my name and no idea where the next paycheck was coming from. And Rose, carving the turkey with the confidence of a woman who had never missed a mortgage payment in her life, looked across the table at Lauren and said, in the sweetest voice you've ever heard, "You know, honey, I've been thinking. You're working double shifts at that hospital, giving up your weekends, just to keep the lights on. Some men, they lift you up. And some men, honestly, they're just born to be carried." The table went quiet. Jim stared at his plate. Nancy refilled her wine glass. Derek chuckled into his napkin. And I sat there, 30 years old, in a borrowed blazer, and I felt the words land on me like a verdict. "Rose," Lauren said quietly. "That's enough." Rose just smiled. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking, sweetheart. Someone has to." That was the beginning. 7 years of Rose Callahan calling me a burden, one family dinner at a time. If you have never been the person at the family table who is openly pitted, let me tell you what it feels like. It feels like being a ghost at your own life. People talk around you, not to you. They make jokes with you in the room and pretend they're for everyone. They smile at you the way you smile at a child who has just done something embarrassing but you're trying to be kind. And the one person, the designated spokesperson for the family's opinion, gets to say the things everyone else is thinking, out loud, with a laugh, so that calling her out would make you the problem. Rose was that person. And she was relentless. Let me give you the highlight reel, because I think you need to understand exactly what 7 years of it looks like. Christmas, 7 years ago. We were back at Jim and Nancy's, And I was working 2 jobs by then, driving a van during the day and doing bookkeeping for a small plumbing company at night. I showed up to the gift exchange in my work clothes, because I'd come straight from a shift, and Rose handed me an envelope with a big smile. "Just a little something to help," she said. "For the truck. Since I know gas has to be hard right now." It was a $50 gas card. She gave it to me in front of everyone. And Derek said, "Hey, man, be grateful. That's more than you make in a week." The whole room laughed. Even Jim, who usually had the decency to look uncomfortable, cracked a smile at that one. I took the card. I said thank you. And I folded it into my pocket where it burned like a brand for the rest of the night. Caleb's 4th birthday party, 6 years ago. Rose's son. I was in the kitchen, helping Lauren carry out the cake, and I heard Rose talking to one of her friends by the window. "I don't know why Lauren keeps him around, honestly," she said, like she was discussing the weather. "She could do so much better. She's just loyal to a fault. It's the nurse in her, she sees everyone as a patient." Her friend laughed. I stood behind the kitchen door with the cake in my hands and listened to the woman who was supposed to be my sister-in-law describe me like I was a stray she'd found on the street. The Father's Day dinner, 5 years ago. Lily was born that spring, our daughter, the best thing that ever happened to me, and I was holding her at the table while Rose watched me like I was handling a piece of evidence. "You know what I love about Father's Day?" she announced to the table. "It really separates the men from the boys. Some men send their kids to private school. Some men," she waved her hand at me, at the baby in my arms, at the whole picture of my life, "well, I guess some men just play house and hope it works out." Lauren's hand found my knee under the table. Squeezed. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. I had Lily in my arms and a family watching to see how I'd react, and I knew that whatever I said would be ammunition for the next year. The New Year's Eve party, 4 years ago. Derek and Rose hosted, at the big house in New Albany, and Rose stood up to give a toast at midnight. "Here's to new beginnings," she said, glass raised. "For those of us who can actually afford them." Everyone laughed. Everyone looked at me. I raised my glass too. I'd been doing it for years by then, smiling at the joke that was me. And the dinner, 3.5 years ago, when I had quietly, secretly, started to put my life back together, though nobody at that table knew it, and I wasn't about to tell them. Rose was in the middle of a story about Derek's latest bonus, and she said, without even looking at me, "Honestly, Lauren, you've carried that man for so long, your back must hurt." I would have left him years ago. But that's the difference between us. I married a provider. You married a project. A project. Not a husband. A project. Something to be worked on, fixed, improved. Something to invest your life into with no realistic expectation of a return. That was what Rose thought of me, and she said it out loud, at a table full of family, and nobody corrected her. Nobody even flinched. Here's what I want you to understand, though. Rose didn't do any of this because she was evil. She did it because she was comfortable. I was the one thing in her otherwise perfect life that she could point at and say at least I'm not that. I was her proof. Her insurance policy. As long as I was the burden, she was the golden girl. As long as I was down, she was up. That's the thing about people like Rose, they don't need you to fail. They need you to stay failed, so their own success has somebody to stand on. So I played my role. I smiled. I thanked her for the gas card. I ate the turkey. I sat at the child's table, emotionally, for 7 years. And through all of it, Lauren never once asked me to fight back. She just put her hand on my knee under the table, and kept passing the potatoes, and believed in me with the unshakable faith of a woman who saw the man I was going to become long before anyone else did. Including me. Let me tell you how a man comes back from being the family burden, because it wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't fast, and it definitely wasn't the kind of story you'd tell at a gala. It started with a broken-down delivery van and a decision I made at 4 in the morning in my mother's spare bedroom. I had been driving for a regional trucking company for about a year and a half. Worn-out routes, thin margins, dispatchers who treated drivers like interchangeable parts. And somewhere in the middle of all that, I started noticing something. The company's clients were contractors, commercial builders, plumbing wholesalers, electrical distributors, and every one of them had the same complaint. Supply chains were a mess. Materials showed up late. Orders were wrong. Nobody was managing the logistics, they were just surviving them. And in that complaint, I heard the exact thing I used to know how to do. I had spent 2 years running a construction supply operation. I knew inventory. I knew vendors. I knew the difference between a warehouse that works and a warehouse that bleeds money. And I knew that if I could solve this problem for one contractor, I could solve it for 10. The problem was money. I had none. I had been bankrupt for 3 years, my credit was a crime scene, and the only person in the world who still believed in me enough to loan me anything was my mother-in-law's daughter, and even Lauren, for all her faith, had limits on what a nurse's salary could stretch to. So I did what you do when nobody will fund you, I started smaller than small. I bought a used delivery van for $600 and a folding table for my garage. I printed a 1-page flyer on my library's printer and walked it into every construction site in Franklin County that would let me pass the gate. Ethan Brooks Logistics. Materials on time, or you don't pay. That was the pitch. That was the whole pitch. And for the first 6 months, it almost killed me. I did the driving myself. I did the bookkeeping at midnight. I ate gas station sandwiches in the van between jobs and called my wife from parking lots so she wouldn't hear how exhausted I was. The first contract that changed everything was a roofing company out of Grove City. Their supplier had missed 3 deliveries in a row, and they were losing $30,000 a week in idle crews. I found them a secondary vendor, negotiated better terms, and ran the deliveries myself for 2 months until they trusted my system. By the end of that year, they signed me as their logistics manager. By the end of the next year, I had 12 clients, 3 vans, and my first warehouse, a 40,000 square foot space on the west side that smelled like dust and grease and possibility. Here's what nobody at the Whitfield family table knew, because I never told them, I was building something real. I hired my first employees, a dispatcher, 2 drivers, an accountant who worked out of my garage until we had an actual office. I landed a contract with a major homebuilder, then a regional hospital system, then a company that supplied parts to every car dealership in Central Ohio. By the 4th year, we had outgrown the warehouse and leased a second one. By the 5th year, we were moving $30 million of materials a year, and I had a team of 40 people whose mortgages got paid because of decisions I made. And I kept my mouth shut about all of it. Why? That's the question everyone asks when they hear this story. Why wouldn't a man who'd been called a burden for years walk into that dinner and throw his success in their faces? Because I had learned something important during those years of being looked down on. A man who has to announce his success is still looking for permission. The men who have actually made it don't need to say a word, the silence does the talking for them. My father used to tell me that when I was a kid, and I never understood it until I was sitting in Rose Callahan's living room, 7 years into being her burden, knowing I could buy her house outright with a single wire transfer, and saying nothing. Lauren knew. Of course Lauren knew, she was the one who'd stayed up with me through all of it, the one who'd come to the warehouse on weekends with coffee and sandwiches for the crew, the one who'd watched me go from a broken man in her mother's spare room to something she'd always believed I could be. But Lauren also understood the game. She understood that announcing yourself to people who've already decided who you are is a waste of breath. Let them be wrong, she told me once, when I was 20 seconds away from telling Rose exactly what I'd built. They'll find out eventually. And when they do, it'll be because it's undeniable, not because you begged them to look. So I went to the dinners. I ate the turkey. I smiled at the jokes about the delivery van, even though I was the one writing the checks that kept half the room employed. I watched Rose and Derek hold court with their stories about their money, their vacations, their gala, and I said nothing, because I was playing the long game and they were playing a game where the prize was the applause of people who didn't matter. But here's the thing about the long game, Rose. It ends. Eventually, the truth walks through the door, and sometimes, it knocks. Now let me tell you about the Callahan's fall, because no story about a burden has a happy ending unless the ones doing the carrying get to put it down. Derek Callahan looked like the perfect husband from the outside. Nice house, nice car, big smile, firm downtown with his name on the door. But I knew something about Derek that nobody else at that dinner table knew, because I'm a man who checks things. It started about 4 years ago, when I noticed Rose's Instagram posts getting quieter. No more Paris trips. No more new cars. The New Year's party got smaller, then stopped. And Derek, who used to talk about his clients like they were trophies, stopped mentioning them altogether. So I did what I do. I checked. Not out of spite, out of habit. I'd been burned by a partner who stole from me. I had learned to look at balance sheets the way other people look at weather. And what I found confirmed what my gut already knew: Derek Callahan's financial advisory firm was in serious trouble. Client money was moving around in ways that looked, at best, creative, and at worst, the kind of thing that gets you banned from the industry for life. There were regulatory filings with gaps in them. There were lawsuits settling quietly, one after another, with non-disclosure agreements so nobody would talk. There was the house in New Albany, the one Rose was so proud of, carrying 2 mortgages, the second one from a private lender at a rate that told me exactly how desperate they'd gotten. I didn't tell Lauren all of it. I told her some. I told her I was worried about her sister, because I was, not in the way that made me feel good, but in the way that a man who has been through the fire recognizes the smell of smoke on someone else's clothes. Derek's in trouble, I said to her one night, after a family dinner where Derek had drunk too much and talked about rebalancing the portfolio with the glassy confidence of a man who has stopped believing his own story. Lauren looked at me for a long moment. "Should we say something?" she asked. "To who?" I said. "Rose doesn't listen to anyone. And Derek would rather burn his own house down than admit he needs help. That's the thing I've learned about people who are drowning in pride: they don't reach for the hand. They reach for the one person they've spent years convincing themselves is beneath them, because asking for help from a peer means admitting you've failed, and asking for help from your inferior, well, that's just charity. That's just doing the poor man a favor by letting him feel useful. Rose was going to come to me eventually. I knew it before she did. The collapse, when it came, was fast. Word spread that Derek's firm had been sold to a bigger firm after an internal restructuring. 60 days later, the bigger firm announced they'd found irregularities that had already been referred to regulators. The state opened an investigation. Clients started suing. And the settlement check started getting written with money that wasn't there. By the end of it, Derek's license was gone, the firm was shuttered, and the Callahans had spent every asset they had trying to keep the facade standing, including the equity in the house. I watched all of it from a distance, the way you watch a storm you know is coming. And about 4 months before that Tuesday night, I did something that still surprises me when I think about it. I didn't do it for revenge. I didn't even do it for Rose. I did it for my wife, and for her parents, and for the fact that the house Rose lived in had my niece in it, a 10-year-old girl named Haley who had no part in any of this and who deserved to sleep in the same bed every night. The Callahans' first mortgage was held by a regional bank that had quietly been shedding its residential portfolio. The note was being sold at a discount, bundled with others, to investors who would never know or care whose lives were attached to the paper. And I, through a holding company I'd set up years earlier for my own estate planning, an LLC with a boring name that nobody at any family dinner would ever recognize, I bought that note. I bought the mortgage on my sister-in-law's house. Here's what that means, in plain terms: when the bank sold the note, the bank stopped being the one holding the paper. My company became the lender. Rose and Derek were still making their payments, or not, as the case turned out to be, but the person they owed, the person who could foreclose or forgive, was me. They didn't know. Nobody knew. The bank sent the standard transfer notice, the kind nobody reads, and the payment started routing to a new address that belonged to a P.O. box in an office park on the west side of Columbus. I sat in my office the night the transfer completed, looking at the document that made me the mortgage holder on the house where Rose Callahan had called me a burden for 7 years, and I thought about how the universe has a sense of humor. Then I put the file in the drawer, went home, and kissed my wife goodnight. I didn't tell her about the note. Not because I didn't trust her, because I wanted to be sure, first, that I was doing this for the right reason. And I was still deciding what the right reason was when Rose knocked on my door. If you're enjoying this story and want to hear how it ends, and trust me, you want to hear how it ends, take a second to hit that subscribe button right now. Leave a comment telling me what you would have done in my shoes. And if this story reminds you of someone in your own family, share it with a friend. Let's get back to it. Tuesday, 4 months after the note transfer. 8:47 p.m. I was in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner, when the doorbell rang. I knew it was her. Not because I'm psychic, because I'd been watching her approach for days. The calls had started a week earlier. Lauren's phone, buzzing at odd hours. Rose, asking to catch up, asking if we were free for dinner, asking questions she'd never asked in her life. And then, the day before the knock, Derek showed up at my office without an appointment. He sat in my lobby for 40 minutes before my assistant told him I was in meetings all day. He left a card. He never did that. Derek Callahan never entered a room without announcing himself. The fact that he'd come to my building, sat in my waiting area, and left without a scene told me everything I needed to know about his state of mind. So when the doorbell rang at 8:47 that Tuesday, I checked the peephole out of habit, saw Rose on my porch in the wind, and took a breath. Then I opened the door and let 7 years of history step into my hallway. She looked terrible. That was the first thing I noticed, because I was not prepared for how terrible she looked. Rose Callahan, who never left the house without armor, was standing in my entryway in a coat that had seen better days, holding her purse with both hands like it was a life raft. Her face was bare. Her eyes were red. She looked the way a person looks when they've finally run out of people to perform for. "Ethan," she said. "Just my name." Quiet. Gone was the sing-song drawl she'd used for a decade, the one that made Ethan sound like a punchline waiting to happen. This was a woman saying a name she needed something from. Rose. I didn't move. "You want to come in? I need to talk to you about the house." The house. Of course. It always came back to the house. I gestured to the living room and she walked in like she was afraid the floor might give way. I gave her a glass of water. I wasn't about to give her anything stronger, and not because I was being cruel, but because I wanted her sober for what was coming. She sat on the edge of the couch, hands wrapped around the glass, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. The silence was loud. It was the loudest silence I'd ever heard, because it was full of 7 years of things that had never been said out loud. "Things have been hard," she started. "Derek's firm, you might have heard, there was an investigation. And it didn't go well, Ethan. It didn't go well at all. We've been selling everything. The cars are gone. The vacations are gone. And the house, we're 4 months behind on the mortgage, and we just got a notice that the note was sold. There's a new lender, some company I've never heard of, and they're not returning our calls. They're going to foreclose, Ethan. They're going to take the house. Haley's room. Everything." She looked up at me, and for the first time in the 7 years I'd known her, I saw genuine fear in Rose's eyes. Real fear. The kind you can't fake. The kind that comes from looking at your child's bedroom and knowing you can't protect her from what's coming. "I don't have anyone else to ask," she said. "My parents are tapped out, they helped us through the first part of it, and they can't do more. Lauren, I know I don't deserve to ask her. I know that. But you were always good with money, Ethan. You always had a head for that. And I thought maybe you could help us figure out who holds the note. Maybe you know people in finance. Maybe you could talk to them, negotiate, give us time. I'm not asking for a handout. I'm asking for help. You're the only person I could think of who might actually know how to fix this. She said it all in a rush, the words tumbling out like she was afraid that if she stopped, she'd lose the nerve. And when she was done, she looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before, and I realized what it was. She was hoping. Rose Callahan was sitting in my living room, hoping that I would help her. The woman who had spent 7 years telling everyone who would listen that I was a burden, a project, a charity case, she had come to the charity case for charity. I let the moment stretch out. Not to torture her. I let it stretch because I needed her to feel the weight of it, to be fully present for what was about to happen, so that when I told her the truth, she'd understand that it wasn't a trick. It was the truth, and the truth had been building for 7 years. Rose, I said. I know who holds the note. Her eyes widened. You do. Can you call them? Can you? I'm not going to call them, Rose. Because I'm the one who holds it. The glass slipped from her hands. It didn't break, it landed on the carpet, water spilling across the floor, neither of us moving to clean it up. She stared at me. Her mouth opened and closed. For the first time in her life, Rose Callahan had nothing to say. You need to understand something, I said, and my voice was calm, the way it gets when I'm in a negotiation and I know every number on the table. I've known about the house for 4 months. I bought the note the week your bank put it up for sale. I paid cash for it, at a discount, through a company you've never heard of, because I knew that if you heard my name on it, you'd do something desperate and stupid, and I didn't want to lose the house on purpose. Why? She whispered. Why would you do that? You hate me. I don't hate you, Rose. I never did. You spent 7 years trying to make me feel small, and you know what? It worked. It worked for a long time. But hate was never the point. The point is that your daughter is my daughter's cousin. The point is that my wife loves you, even when you don't deserve it. The point is that I know exactly what it feels like to watch the life you built get taken away from you, and I decided that whatever I think of you, I wasn't going to let that happen to a little girl. I paused, because I wanted her to hear what came next clearly. And I was going to tell you. Eventually. I was going to call you, when I was sure you were ready to hear it. You just got here first. Rose sat on my couch with water pooled at her feet and her mouth still open, and I watched the woman who had spent 7 years carving me down try to process what I had just said. The silence stretched so long I started to think she might never speak again. And then, very quietly, she started to laugh. Not a funny laugh. The other kind. The kind that comes out of a person who has just realized the universe has been laughing at her this whole time. Of course, she said. Of course it's you. Of course the one person who could save us is the person I spent 7 years telling everyone was worthless. She shook her head, and a tear finally escaped down her cheek. God, Ethan. You must be loving this. Do you really think that's why I did it? She looked at me, searching my face for the lie. She didn't find one. I wasn't going to pretend I hadn't felt the irony of it. I was human, and part of me had felt the exquisite poetry of that file sitting in my drawer while she carved the turkey at Thanksgiving. But that wasn't why I bought the note. It was never the why. Let me tell you something, Rose, I said, sitting down across from her. 7 years ago, I lost everything. My business, my house, my savings, all of it. A man I trusted took it from me, and I was left with $380,000 of debt and no idea how I was going to feed my family. And do you know what the first family dinner after that felt like? You called me a burden in front of everyone. Your husband laughed. Your parents went quiet. And I sat there, in a borrowed blazer, and I smiled, because if I'd shown even 1 second of what I was feeling, you would have used it against me for the next decade. She winced. Good. I wanted her to wince. I wanted her to feel the exact shape of every word she'd ever said to me, because I had carried them all, and I had never once let her see how heavy they were. Thanksgiving, 7 years ago. You told Lauren she was born to carry men like me. Christmas, 6 years ago. You gave me a gas card in front of the whole family and your husband joked that it was more than I made in a week. Caleb's birthday, 5 years ago. I heard you tell your friend that Lauren kept me around because she sees everyone as a patient. Father's Day. New Year's Eve. Every single dinner at your parents' house for 7 years, you found a way to remind me that I was the burden, the project, the charity case, and not one person at that table ever told you to stop. I listed them the way a man lists inventory. Calm. Precise. Dates and all. Because the truth is, I had never forgotten a single one. I had stored them the way a drowning man stores air, not to use them as weapons one day, but because they were all I had to hold on to during the years when I had nothing else. Now, I said, I want to be clear about something. I did not buy your mortgage so I could stand in your living room and humiliate you. If I'd wanted revenge, I could have let the bank take the house and been done with it. I would have been justified. Half the people in your family would have cheered for me. But I didn't do that, Rose. I bought the note because Haley sleeps in that house. I bought it because my wife loves you, and my wife's heart would break if she saw you lose everything the way I once did. And I bought it because, and here's the part you're not going to like, I know what it's like to be you right now. I've been sitting in that exact seat. The one where you've run out of everyone, and the only hand left to hold is the hand you spent years slapping away. She was crying freely now. Not the pretty kind of crying, the kind you do with your chin up so your mascara stays put. The ugly kind. The kind that comes from somewhere deep. I spent 7 years being cruel to you, she said, her voice breaking. 7 years. And you bought my house. You saved my house. She pressed her hands to her face. What kind of person does that make me? The kind who's going to be okay, I said. Because here's the thing about being at the bottom, Rose. I know it feels like the end of the world. It's not. It's the beginning of a different one. But only if you're willing to change who you are at the dinner table. She looked up, eyes red. What does that mean? It means the note is yours to keep, I said, on 3 conditions. I watched her try to figure out what the conditions were going to be. I could see her running the possibilities behind her eyes. She expected money, maybe, or humiliation, or some grand public apology I'd been owed for years. She was wrong about all of them. First, I said, your family is going to be honest about what's happening. No more pretending Derek's firm is fine. No more gala stories. If Jim and Nancy ask how you're doing, you tell them the truth, and you accept the help they can actually give. You don't have our mother-in-law's house on the line because you're too proud to say the word bankrupt. Second, you're going to pay it back. Not to me, I don't want your money, and I don't need it. You're going to pay it back to Haley. Every month, you and Derek put whatever you can into an account in her name. When she turns 18, she gets a college fund that was built by her parents clawing their way back from nothing. I'm not doing this so you can keep living like nothing happened. I'm doing this so that girl grows up watching her parents rebuild, with their own hands. And third? Third, I said, and I let myself smile for the first time all night, you're going to stop calling me a burden. And more than that, the next time someone at that table tries to make a joke about my family, or my background, or the years I spent driving a delivery van to feed my daughter, you're going to be the one who shuts it down. You're going to be the one who says Ethan's family is not a joke. That's all I'm asking for. That's the price of the house. Rose stared at me. That's it? That's all you want? After everything I did to you, you want me to stick up for you at dinner? That's the job, I said. That's the whole job. Because I don't need your money, Rose. I don't need your apology, not really. What I needed, what I've needed for 7 years, was for someone in that family to stand next to me instead of behind me. And you're the one who's going to start. She didn't answer me that night. She just sat there, cried out, and nodded. I walked her to the door, and before she stepped out into the cold, she turned back and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. It took me a moment to place it. It was respect. "Thank you, Ethan," she said. "Not for the house. Not for the note. Just thank you." Like a person acknowledging another person for the first time. Lauren came home from her late shift at 11:20 and found me sitting at the kitchen table with the file folder in front of me. She looked at it, then at me, and she knew. I don't know how she knew, she just did, the way she always did. She set down her bag, walked over, and wrapped her arms around my shoulders from behind. "Rose was here," she said. "She was. And you told her." "I told her everything." She was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, "I've been waiting for you to do that for years." She didn't sound angry. She sounded relieved. "I thought you might hate me for keeping it from everyone all this time." "Hate you?" I turned to look at her. "Lauren, you're the reason I didn't lose my mind. You're the reason any of this exists." I reached up and held her hand. I just couldn't let her lose that house. Not with Haley in it. "I know," she said. "That's why I married you." The weeks that followed were strange. For the first time in my memory, the Whitfield family dinners didn't feel like an ambush. Rose showed up at Thanksgiving, her first Thanksgiving without Derek at her side, because Derek had moved out 2 weeks after that Tuesday night, and to his credit, he'd done it quietly, leaving her the house and the car and whatever dignity he had left. She was thinner. She was quieter. And when my mother-in-law Nancy made a joke about my delivery van days, a joke she'd made 100 times, one I'd smiled through 100 times, it was Rose who set down her fork and said, "Mom. We don't do that anymore." The table went silent. Jim looked at Rose like she'd grown a second head. And Nancy, who had never been told no by her older daughter in her life, blinked and said, "I was just teasing." "No," Rose said. "You weren't. And we're done pretending it's funny. Ethan built a company from nothing. He's been running it for years. He owns the roof over our heads, did you know that? He owns the roof over my head, Mom. And I spent 7 years treating him like a failure." Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. "I'm never doing that again. And neither are you." You could have heard a pin drop. Lauren's hand found my knee under the table, some habits never die, and squeezed. And I sat there, 40 years old, at a table full of people who had spent a decade looking down on me, and I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The silence was doing the talking, exactly like my father said it would. The rest of the night, the conversation was different. Jim asked me about my company, actually asked, not the polite surface question he'd always used before. He asked about the warehouses, the contracts, the hospital system I supplied. He listened to the answers. Nancy asked about Lily, and meant it. And Rose, across the table, met my eyes once, just once, and nodded. A small nod. A truce. A start. Here's what I want you to understand about the end of this story. I didn't get revenge. I could have. I had the power, for one long night, to make Rose Callahan feel every ounce of the pain she'd spent 7 years feeding me. I could have watched her beg. I could have made her crawl. And part of me, the part that still remembers being 30 years old in a borrowed blazer at her Thanksgiving table, wanted to. But I had learned something in those years that Rose was only beginning to learn, being the person who carries people is its own kind of freedom. And I had a wife who believed in me before I believed in myself, a daughter who would grow up watching me choose grace over revenge, and a company I'd built with my own hands from nothing. I didn't need to tear Rose down to stand tall. I just needed her to stop standing on me. The house note is still in my file. Rose and Derek, separated now, but co-parenting, both of them working real jobs for the first time in years, make their monthly payment into Haley's account, and I've never once had to ask for it. Rose has called me 3 times since that night. Twice to ask for advice about her new job. Once, just to talk. She hasn't stopped being Rose, she's still opinionated, still dramatic, still the first person in any room to tell you what she thinks. But she doesn't look down on me anymore. And when I look at her now, I don't see the woman who called me a burden for 7 years. I see the woman who knocked on my door. Last Sunday, at her parents' house, Rose stood up to make the toast before dinner, a job she'd claimed for herself a decade ago and never relinquished. She raised her glass, and the whole table went quiet, bracing for whatever performance was coming. And she looked at me, and she said, "To Ethan Brooks. The man who taught my whole family what it means to carry people instead of putting them down. I'm proud to call him my brother." She paused, and her voice got thick. I just wish I'd been smart enough to see it sooner. Jim raised his glass. Nancy raised hers. Lauren was crying. And I lifted my glass and thought about the knock, the 3 quick raps and one more, the wind on my porch, the woman in the too big coat. 7 years is a long time to be a burden. But it only took one Tuesday night to find out that the man she'd been stepping on her whole life was the one holding her up. That's the thing about people like Rose. They spend years looking down at the ground beneath their feet. They never think to thank it, until the day it stops holding them, and they realize it was the only thing keeping them from falling.